Ireland, Crimes and Mysteries with Newells.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you're a returning listener, I want to say a big thank you for your continued support. If this is your first time listening to my podcast, welcome. It's great to have you on board. So without further ado, let's get started on today's story. Hey guys, I hope you're all keeping well. Today's case is going to be a little bit different. It's still a podcast about a serious crime, and yes, this one remains a mystery to this very day. The difference, I guess, is it's about a horse. But it's not just any horse. This horse was the most talked about sports personality in the early 80s in Ireland and beyond. Not just for his amazing triumphs, but also for his devastating demise. Today's case is about a beloved horse named Shergar. Ireland in the 1970s and 80s had an economy that was in trouble. It was a place of low morale, wide-scale unemployment and mass emigration. But the horse racing industry was a big deal, employing over 20,000 and attracting big investment and large amounts of money from overseas, which meant it continued to thrive during these turbulent times. In 1980, an Irish racehorse named Shergar would take the racing world by storm. Owned by the Aga Khan, a well-known and respected horse breeder, who is also the king and spiritual leader of the Shia Muslim religion and a direct descendant of Muhammad, Shergar would win the Chris Plate at Newbury with jockey Lester Pickett on the 19th of September 1980 as the 11-8 favourite. He won by 2.5 lengths. Lester Pickett and the horse had built up a very strong bond, and Lester would later say that riding Shergar was very special indeed. He took second place in the William Hill Futurity Stakes that October. Despite this unexpected defeat, racing correspondents were still very impressed with Shergar, one commenting that he was a magnificent stamp of a horse and a serious consideration for the following year's Derby. By 1981, Shergar had filled out and was primed for the year ahead. His preparation started on the 25th of April, where he won the Guardian newspaper classic trial at Sandown. A young, extremely talented jockey called Walter Swinburne rode him in the race. Known as the choir boy because of his youthful, baby-faced looks, Walter and Shergar made a great team, with Shergar winning by a very impressive 10 lengths. After this magnificent win, his odds to win the Derby shortened from 25-1 to 8-1. He went on to win his next race, the Chester Vase, on the 5th of May 1981 with Walter, winning by a massive 12 lengths. After these very impressive wins, all eyes were now fixed firmly on the Epsom Derby. There was debate over who should ride Shergar. Everyone wondered if the Aga Khan and Michael Stout, his trainer, would allow a 19-year-old Walter Swinburne to ride him in such an important race. It would have been Walter's first ride in the race. Other jockeys with far more experience were lining up to ride Shergar, who by now was seen as the most exciting 3-year-old colt that year. The Aga Khan and Michael Stout decided in the end to put their faith in Walter. He spoke before the race, saying when asked by how far he would win that he wouldn't be looking back to see, that's for sure. The Epsom Derby is an extremely important race on the racing calendar. The Derby Stakes, which is its proper title, is a Group 1 flat race. It is run over a distance of 1 mile or 4 furlongs. It is open to 3-year-old colts and fillies and takes place at the Epsom Downs racecourse in Surrey. The first ever race taking place there in 1780. It is one of the most famous horse races in the world. It is also Britain's richest flat horse race, with over £1 million in prize money for the winner. On the 3rd of June 1981, Shergar ran in the Derby. He was well placed throughout the race, and at the Tattenham corner, which is the last bend, Shergar took first place and without breaking a sweat galloped away from the other horses and won by a very impressive 10 lengths, smashing the record. He had won by the largest winning margin ever, and this record still stands to this day. Commentator Peter Bromley said during the race, "There's only one horse in it. You need a telescope to see the rest." This race catapulted Shergar to international fame and made him a national treasure back in Ireland. After the Epsom Derby win, the Aga Khan had been offered $40 million by US-based owners to syndicate Shergar, but he turned it down, deciding instead to keep the horse in Europe and syndicate him for $10 million at $250,000 for each of the 40 shares, which was a record price at the time. The Aga Khan kept 6 shares for himself, and the others were sold individually to buyers from 9 other countries. Shergar was now an extremely valuable horse. When eventually put to stud, the shareholders would have the option each year of selecting a mare to be covered or of selling that option on. The stud fees were £60,000 to £80,000 per cover, which meant that shareholders could expect to make a profit from stud within 4 years and command this price for anything up to 20 years. Owning shares in Shergar was considered a real privilege, but the shareholders had to organise their own insurance. Each individual policy insured him for death caused by accident, illness or disease, with only some of the policies covering theft. He went on to win the Irish Derby at the Curragh on the 27th of June 1981 by 4 lengths, with Lester Pickett as his jockey, as Walter Swinburne had been suspended after an infringement at Royal Ascot. Commentator Micheál O'Hare informing the listeners, "He's winning it so easily. It's Shergar first and the rest are nowhere." Lester Pickett said after the race that he was in no doubt that Shergar would win the race, saying he was the best horse he'd ever raced. He went on to win the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Diamond Stakes at Ascot on the 25th of July 1981 after having a month's rest. After which the Aga Khan was considering entering him in the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe that autumn, but felt he needed one more race to be ready, and so Shergar was entered in the St Leger Stakes at Doncaster on the 12th of September 1981 with jockey Walter Swinburne. A story had been published in the racing newspaper Sporting Life 10 days before the race, saying that Shergar had not been preparing or practising and looked mulish. These rumours were denied by Stout, but when Shergar raced at St Leger's, despite running well initially, there was heavy rain prior to the race, which made the ground soft, which didn't suit Shergar. When Swinburne tried to accelerate him on the final straight, Shergar would not respond and ended the race in 4th place. This surprised the Aga Khan, and worried that the horse was unwell, he had various tests carried out on Shergar, which showed that he was in good health. He trained well after that, but the Aga Khan, still concerned and not wanting to risk racing him, did not enter him in the Lark, deciding instead to retire him to stud in Ballymany in the Curragh. This came as a big shock to the racing world when they heard Shergar had run his last race and would be retired. But the Aga Khan did not want to impact the reputation Shergar had built up as one of the greats, which could have a negative effect on his desirability as a stud. So he was retired at the peak of his career at just 3 years old. As I said, the Aga Khan had turned down very substantial offers to put Shergar to stud in the US, but because of an outbreak of equine venereal disease having caused travel restrictions, along with the fact that Shergar was so well loved in Ireland, he chose to stand him at Ballymany instead. So in October 1981, Shergar arrived home to great fanfare and a real hero's welcome with a civic reception. He was paraded down the main street in Newbridge, County Kildare. It was like the Beatles had come to town. Large crowds gathered to catch a glimpse of their hero. It was said at the time that Shergar was a national hero in Ireland, one of their most recognisable sports personalities. He was adored by the Irish public and at the time of his retirement was the most valuable stud horse in Ireland. Shergar was born on the 3rd of March 1978 at Seshoon, which is the private stud farm of his owner, the Aga Khan, in County Kildare. Shergar was sired or fathered by Great Nephew, a British stallion whose wins included the Prix de Moulins and the Prix d'Olaire in France in 1967. He had already produced an English and Irish Derby winner in Grundy, so expectations would be very high for the horse. Shergar's dam, or mother, was Charmine, a 7th generation descendant of Mumtaz Mahal, a horse that was described by the National Sporting Library as one of the most important brood mares of the 20th century, producing several champions during her breeding career. Shergar was described as being a quintessential thoroughbred, being tall and lean and having an athletic build, ideal for racing. He had a light brown coat and a black mane and tail, and sported 4 white socks on his legs. He had a white stripe running down his nose known as a blaze, and one of his eyes was blue, a phenomenon known as walleye. In racing circles, some believed that a horse with walleye was more predisposed to being skittish and temperamental. The year that Shergar was born, the Aga Khan announced he was sending some of his prized yearlings to be trained in Great Britain. So Shergar was sent into training in Newmarket, England, with legendary trainer Michael Stout in 1979. He was an up-and-coming flat horse trainer who had already enjoyed success in some of the top British races. So in 1979, a 1-year-old Shergar settled into Stout's yard to be broken in and started training for his first race. Stout said of Shergar that he was easy to break, had a good temperament and responded well to training, dismissing any rumours that Shergar was temperamental. By the time the Aga Khan retired Shergar back to Ballymany Stud, he had become well known for his nice temperament and his elegance in the way he moved. He was one of the Aga Khan's success stories, being more relaxed than the average thoroughbred. He was nicknamed Ireland's Pegasus and was in big demand. In 1982, he covered 44 mares, from which 36 foals were born, 17 colts and 19 fillies, 3 of which went on to win group races, his most successful progeny being Athol, who won the Irish St. Leger. But too many of his progenies were disappointing for a horse with Shergar's racing prowess. By February 1983, which would have been Shergar's second stud season, he was again in high demand, with 55 mares to cover, and he was expected to earn $1 million from that season. But with the events that were about to transpire, Shergar would not get the chance to even start his second season, and sadly he would never get a chance to prove his doubters wrong. Ballymany Stud, like a lot of stud farms in Ireland at the time, had very primitive security, having very few measures in place. The main entrance was a wooden gate that was easily unlocked from the outside. The avenue led straight up to the stables, which had nameplates outside each individual stable, making identifying each horse a breeze. And it was in one of these stables you would find Shergar, with his name hanging proudly over his stable door. All the staff there said Shergar had a lovely temperament and he was well loved, as he was easy to care for. His main carer was a man named Jim Fitzgerald, who lived only a short walk from the stud farm. Jim needed to live nearby as he had to be on hand to care for the horses at all times, no matter the time of day or night. Jim had loved horses all his life and had been working for the Aga Khan since he was 16. He took great pride in his work and would often be seen talking to the horses while grooming them or cleaning out their stables, which he kept immaculately. Everyone knew Jim loved the horses and had a very unique bond with Shergar, both man and horse having a deep, evident affection for each other. He would later say that Shergar got to him. He was a nice horse to do anything with. It was that good nature combined with his elite athleticism that made Shergar so popular. He was endearing rather than imposing. When the 1982 season began, Shergar was studded out at a cost of £70,000 per day. At the start of Shergar's 1983 season, he had a full calendar with 55 mares to cover and was expected to make over £1 million. 1 week prior to stud season in 1983, on Tuesday the 8th of February, there had been a horse auction at Goffs in Kill, County Kildare, which is about 22 kilometres from Ballymany Stud. This attracted visitors from all over the country, so it wasn't unusual to see horse boxes on the usually quiet roads that day and well into the night. The fact that it was also an early breeding season also meant there was an increase in horse boxes on the road. So no one took much notice when they saw them, no matter the time of day or night during this period. The 8th of February was also one of the coldest nights of that year so far. That morning, Shergar was taken out to exercise, with Jim returning him to his stable later that afternoon. Later that evening, Jim went home to his wife and 6 children for his dinner. At around 8 p.m, he went back up to the stud farm to check on the horses and make sure they were all settled and comfortable, something he did every night. It was a foggy night, but everything seemed as it should be. Happy everything was okay, Jim walked home after saying goodnight to the horses. He was upstairs in his house at approximately 20 to 9 when someone knocked on his front door. Jim's son Bernard answered the door before Jim got downstairs. When Bernard answered the door, he was met by two men wearing balaclavas and head to toe in dark clothes, both holding guns. One of the men said sorry to Bernard and then asked him, "Is he in?" Bernard called out to his dad, but as he did, the man hit him across the back and he fell to the floor. When Jim arrived downstairs, he saw his son Bernard pinned to the floor by the men, who were brandishing their weapons. Then two more men with balaclavas came in waving pistols at the rest of the family, with two more following. Two of the men ushered all the children into a bedroom, while the other four made Jim and his wife Madge go into the kitchen. Jim would later say the men appeared very calm and in control, and would talk to each other using the code word Cresswell. He said he felt the attack was very carefully planned out. One of the men then said to Jim that they had come for Shergar, who was by now the most famous racehorse in the world. Waving his pistol, one of the men demanded to be taken to him. Jim obeyed without question, conscious of the fact that there was a gun pointing at his wife and 6 children. He was marched over to Ballymany at gunpoint by 4 of the men, while the other 2 remained back at the house to keep an eye on the family. They arrived at the stables at around 10 to 9. Jim would later say that he believed horses could sense the emotion of the people they knew and were dealing with on a daily basis. So he did his best to remain calm in front of Shergar so as not to upset or alarm him. This strategy seemed to work as Shergar remained calm and was easily led from the stables. Jim said he felt sickened as he was forced to take Shergar from his comfortable stable into a shabby horse box. He said it was at this point he noticed that the men were also carrying shortwave radios. He also noticed that one of the men seemed to know about horses and seemed more confident around Shergar than his companions. He said one of the men was really aggressive, but the other one wasn't, him being the man who had said sorry at his front door. Jim loaded Shergar into the horse box. 2 of the men got into the car and drove away as Jim looked on, helpless to do anything to help Shergar, as the other 2 men were there with their pistols and ordered Jim into the back of another vehicle. He was made to lie down with a coat over his face. They then proceeded to drive around for over 4 hours. They let him go at the side of a road nearly 40 kilometres northeast of Ballymany Stud, giving him directions to the nearest town of Kilcock. They warned Jim if he or any of his family rang the Gardaí, they would be in serious trouble. Before releasing him, they told him they wanted £2 million for Shergar's safe return and would be in touch with further instructions using the code name King Neptune. They then told Jim to turn around and not look back as they drove off into the night. Coming up next, we'll find out what happened after Shergar's audacious kidnapping.
Island Crimes and Mysteries continues after this short break. Welcome back to Island Crimes and Mysteries with Nools.
Jim was relieved to realise he was still in the same county and not too far from the village. He walked to Kilcock and rang his brother Des, who he asked without explaining why to come and pick him up. He arrived home after midnight and was very relieved to see that his family were safe, despite being shaken by their ordeal. It was only then that Jim was able to raise the alarm and he rang the stud manager, Ghislaine Drion, to give him the shocking news. He urged him not to say anything to the Gardaí on account of the threats made against his family. Drion first tried to contact the Aga Khan but was unsuccessful. He then contacted other shareholders of Shergar, including Shergar's vet, Stan Cosgrove. Stan rang the then chairman of the Irish Thoroughbred Breeders Association and former army captain Sean Berry, who rang his neighbour, Fine Gael TD for Kildare and Minister for Finance Alan Dukes, who said Captain Berry was in a seriously agitated state. Dukes said the horse had disappeared. No one knew where he was gone and they didn't know what to do. I said to call the police immediately, which I think they did soon after that. Dukes would later confess he didn't want to be dragged into it, as he was due to present his first budget later that morning and had been working all hours to get ready and needed to stay focused. So he contacted the Minister for Justice, Michael Noonan. With all the delays in contacting the Gardaí, the kidnappers now had an 8-hour head start on any investigation, putting the Gardaí on the back foot from the beginning. The trail was already gone cold. Because the gang had carried out the daring kidnapping of Shergar on the same day as the auction at Goff's, asking people if they had seen a horse box on the roads around Ballymany was a pointless exercise. An appeal was put out for all the farmers to check their fields, outbuildings and barns. Many false sightings were reported. It seemed like an insurmountable task for the Gardaí. Rumours were abound that Shergar was already over the border and more than likely gone overseas. The news of Shergar's kidnapping spread like wildfire, captivating the attention of the public and horse racing enthusiasts worldwide. The audacity and skill displayed by the kidnappers added to the intrigue surrounding the case. People were astounded that such a high-profile racehorse could be taken from a stud farm with such ease. The incident was unprecedented, making it one of the most sensational crimes in the history of horse racing. From the beginning, the Aga Khan was reluctant to pay any ransom, unsure if he did pay the money that Shergar would be returned unharmed, or at all. He was also concerned that if he did pay the ransom, it would endanger every high-profile horse in Ireland, making them all lucrative targets. Some of the shareholders did not agree with the Aga Khan. They wanted to pay the ransom. They had an awful lot of money to lose if Shergar was not returned. The first contact made by the kidnappers was at around the same time Jim was breaking the news of Shergar's kidnapping, and it was to a Judy Maxwell, a horse breeder in County Down. The caller claimed to have Shergar and demanded a £40,000 ransom. This would later puzzle investigators, as the gang had initially told Jim the ransom was £2 million. Not knowing about the events in Ballymany at this point, the Maxwells thought it was a bizarre joke. But not long after that call, another call was made to the BBC in Belfast. This time the caller demanded to meet with 3 horse racing journalists to negotiate with them for Shergar's release. They were John Oakley of the Sunday Telegraph, Peter Campling of the Sun and ITV's Derek Thompson. They were all awoken in the early hours and asked if they would help with the rescue of Shergar. They all agreed and had to make their way to Belfast by the following afternoon and meet at the Europa Hotel, which coincidentally during the Northern Ireland conflict became known as the world's most bombed hotel after being targeted some 33 times between 1970 and 1994. The hotel was flooded with reporters who witnessed the moment John Oakley took a call which directed him to go to the Maxwell's house and await further instructions. They had made efforts to prolong the call to try and trace it, but this failed. That evening, the 3 journalists, along with a posse of other reporters and Gardaí, made their way to the Maxwells, where they all sat around waiting patiently for the next phone call. In the early hours of the morning, a man rang. He said that the codename Arkle was to be used in any further negotiations, but he later rang back and said that there had been an accident and Shergar was dead. This was believed to be a hoax or a distraction by the kidnappers. Meanwhile, someone rang Ballymany Stud using the original codename King Neptune, which had been given to Jim Fitzgerald by the kidnappers. In this call, they demanded the $2 million and said they wanted it in used notes. They also demanded a number for the Aga Khan's Paris office for further negotiations. Over the next 2 days, numerous calls took place between the French office and the kidnappers, with the Aga Khan's office stressing that they were having difficulty getting all 35 shareholders to agree on any course of action. They asked for proof that Shergar was alive and okay, and Neptune agreed to send proof. Stan Cosgrove, Shergar's vet, was tasked with going to the Crofton Hotel on the Swords Road in Dublin to pick up a message using the Eurovision winner Johnny Logan's name. The hotel was staked out by Garda detectives, but when Cosgrove went to the reception, there was no message. Neptune had sussed the stakeout and was not happy. He rang back some hours later with a new location, Rossnaree Hotel near Drogheda. A Polaroid photo had been left at the hotel reception showing Shergar's head with a copy of a newspaper dated the 11th of February in the background. Although it was confirmed to be Shergar, the Aga Khan was not happy with this photo. He did not feel it proved he was still alive and demanded a full-body photo of Shergar. The final call with Neptune was at 10:40 p.m. on the 12th of February, where the negotiators passed on the Aga Khan's dissatisfaction with the photo and stated that it did not prove that Shergar was still alive. Neptune told the negotiators if they were not satisfied, that's it, and hung up. He never called back again. This was a major blow, the loss of contact with the kidnappers despite repeated requests for them to get back in contact. Ireland's reputation in the equine industry was at stake, as well as the reputation of the Gardaí. The press, especially the British press, had a field day with the head of the investigation, Chief Superintendent James Spud Murphy, who wore a fedora hat and spoke with a thick Irish accent. Although well regarded, Murphy's approach to the investigation came across as quite unusual, with him revealing to the media some of the more unorthodox approaches to finding Shergar, from diviners to clairvoyants. People were not taking him seriously and were losing confidence in the investigators. Sean Berry canvassed the bloodstock industry and got together an award for £100,000 for any information leading to the safe return of Shergar. This in hindsight proved to be a bad mistake, as his phone was inundated with people claiming to know the whereabouts of Shergar. He said a detective was in his house for a week screening calls. They tapped all the calls, he said, and had my house tapped, as well as my car being bugged. It went on for weeks, he said. Berry said that someone did make money out of their efforts to find Shergar. Stan Cosgrove was contacted by a man that offered him information. An arrangement was made to establish he was legit, where he twice sent back a large sum of money before a final deal was made. But when the final sum of £70,000 was placed at the pickup point, it disappeared and Cosgrove never got any information on Shergar. After a period of time, it became obvious that Shergar was not going to be returned alive, and a search for his remains commenced with urgency, as some of the syndicate holders, including Vet Cosgrove, were being refused compensation by the insurers because there was no absolute proof that Shergar was indeed dead. But no trace of Shergar has ever been found, and the mystery continues to this day what Shergar's final fate was. There are several theories about what happened to him. The owners and shareholders believe he was taken to create confusion and publicity rather than for ransom, as many of the demands would have been impossible to fulfil. One example being Neptune demanded that the ransom be paid in £100 sterling notes, but these notes did not even exist. It was also surmised that the kidnappers had not realised that Shergar was owned by shareholders and not exclusively belonging to the Aga Khan. This, of course, made any negotiations very complicated, as everyone had to agree on any decision made, which did not happen. Early in the investigation, unbeknownst to the media, the Gardaí had found a magazine from a Sterry MPI 69 machine gun, which suggested a link to the IRA in South Armagh. The Gardaí also had a description of the horse box from Jim, but no trace of it was ever found. With the Gardaí not releasing all of their leads, like the description of the horse box, a lot of inaccurate reporting took place in the press, which did not help the investigation. During the 1980s, the armed campaign by the IRA was in full swing, and funding was required for arms and political activity. It was estimated that an annual budget of between 2 and 5 million was required, which put the organisation under pressure to gather the funds. After the alleged success of the kidnapping of Ben Dunn, the head of Dunn Stores at the time, by the IRA in October 1981, it was decided to undertake another kidnapping. This time they allegedly set their sights on the most expensive and sought-after thoroughbred horse in the world, Shergar. In his autobiography in 1999, Sean O'Callaghan, a former member of the organisation who worked as an informant for the Gardaí, said that the plot to kidnap Shergar was devised by a leading member of the Army Council within the IRA, while he was serving a sentence in Portlaoise prison. This person had been put in charge of the Special Operations Unit and ordered to raise £7 million. He had several other members working under him in this unit. 2 weeks after Shergar was kidnapped, one of these men told Sean O'Callaghan that he had been involved in the theft of the horse and that Shergar was killed very soon after his abduction, after he had panicked and became uncontrollable and injured his leg in the process. So the decision was made to kill Shergar. He said no one was properly trained to look after the horse. In the autobiography, he states that Shergar was killed within days of his abduction. He went on to say in an RTE interview in 2004 that the man who told him strongly suggested that Shergar was killed within hours of his kidnap. The IRA have never accepted responsibility or denied responsibility for the kidnapping. Then in August 1983, in an attempt to raise the money they had allegedly failed to raise with Shergar, an attempted kidnapping of another businessman in County Wicklow took place. The Gardaí had been forewarned about this and were at the house waiting for the kidnappers. A gunfight ensued and 5 men were arrested and received substantial jail sentences. O'Callaghan stated that, essentially, the same team that went to kidnap Shergar carried out the kidnap attempt in County Wicklow. No arrests have ever been made in Shergar's kidnapping, and the IRA have never admitted their involvement. Some people believe these to be the true events of what happened to Shergar, while others are sceptical of O'Callaghan's story. In a 2008 special investigation by the Sunday Telegraph, information was obtained from another IRA source who stated that O'Callaghan had not been told the full story because the IRA were embarrassed by what had happened. According to the source, a vet that the IRA had arranged to care for Shergar had never turned up because his wife had threatened to leave him if he got involved. He said that once they realised that the Aga Khan was not going to pay, they made the decision they were going to release Shergar unharmed. But because of the high-profile coverage the kidnapping was getting, with one member afraid they were under surveillance from the Gardaí, it was decided by the gang it would be too risky, so the order was given to kill Shergar. Shockingly, the source claimed that the 2 men went into Shergar's stable with a machine gun. He went on to say, quote, "Shergar was machine gunned to death. There was blood everywhere and the horse even slipped in his own blood. There was a lot of cursing and swearing because the horse wouldn't die. It was a very bloody death." Walter Swinburne, Shergar's former jockey, was very distressed when he heard that this could have been how Shergar died, saying, "No horse deserves an ending like that, let alone one as special as Shergar. It doesn't bear thinking about really if that was Shergar's true fate." As I said earlier, Shergar's remains have never been found, and ultimately what happened to him remains a mystery. Several sources claim that he was buried near Ballymany, County Leitrim, on the farm of an IRA veteran from the 1940s, making it virtually impossible to get permission to dig the land. Over the years, several claims have been made of equine skeletons being Shergar's. The Gardaí have used a horse specialist with knowledge in equine pathology several times when a horse's remains were suspected to be that of Shergar's. Some strands of Shergar's mane and tail have been retained for identification purposes. Shergar's kidnapping had a profound impact on the horse racing industry. It led to significant improvements in security measures to prevent similar incidents in the future. The theft of such a high-profile racehorse exposed vulnerabilities in existing security protocols and prompted a reassessment of how valuable racehorses are protected. Following Shergar's kidnapping, stud farms and racing establishments around the world implemented stricter security measures, including increased surveillance, enhanced fencing and improved access controls. The impact of Shergar's kidnapping extended beyond security measures. The incident overshadowed Shergar's remarkable racing achievements, casting a long shadow over his legacy. Shergar was not only a highly successful racehorse, but also a symbol of excellence and triumph. Shergar's natural talent, combined with his charismatic personality, endeared him to fans around the world. His impressive victories in prestigious races such as the Epsom Derby thrilled audiences and solidified his place in racing history. However, the narrative surrounding Shergar shifted from his triumphs on the track to the shocking events of his abduction. The kidnapping became the defining moment of Shergar's story, and his racing accomplishments were often overshadowed by the mystery surrounding his disappearance. To honour his memory, the annual Shergar Cup at Ascot serves as a tribute to the legendary racehorse. The event is a competition between 4 teams: Great Britain and Ireland, Europe, the rest of the world, and an all-women's team. The winners are presented with a trophy showing Shergar on it, which was donated by the Aga Khan. The Shergar Cup is a testament to the lasting impression that Shergar left on the horse racing industry and the continued reverence he receives from those within the sport. On the 20th anniversary of Shergar's Derby win, a bronze statuette of him was presented to the winning jockey, and a statue of Shergar stands proudly in the grounds of Giltown Stud, County Kildare, which is owned by the Aga Khan. Will we ever find out what really happened to Shergar? At this stage, probably not. But you never know. I always had a general overview of the story of Shergar, but never knew the intricate details surrounding his abduction, the ensuing negotiations, and probable subsequent murder. Now, since I've researched it and know more about it, it leaves me with a heavy heart. Putting aside the financial aspect of this, all I can think about is Shergar himself. How terrified he must have been, taken from his comfortable surroundings by strangers. How was he treated? How did he really die? Did he suffer? Or was he actually taken abroad? There are so many scenarios that run through your mind. And of course, next I think of Jim Fitzgerald, who was left in an impossible position. On the one hand, he was terrified for his family and was obviously going to do whatever he was told to ensure their safety. But on the other hand, what he had to do was forcefully give up an animal he had created such a strong bond with. From all I've read of Jim, he loved that horse. It was evident in how he spoke about him and how he carried the guilt with him of what happened to Shergar. He was put in an awful situation. On his retirement from the stud farm in 1998 at the age of 68, the Aga Khan presented Jim with a picture of Shergar and a handwritten note expressing his gratitude for all his hard work and dedication, both of which Jim treasured. And that gesture right there showed that the Aga Khan held no blame for Jim, only respect for him and his work. So guys, that's it for today's episode of the Ireland Crimes and Mysteries podcast. Again, thanks for your listenership, and don't forget to subscribe to the show and hit that auto download so you never miss an episode. Until the next time, keep your eyes open and your mind curious. This podcast has been compiled from information gathered in the public sphere, like news articles, documentaries, and open source material that can be found on the web. Everything in this podcast is alleged unless a conviction has taken place.
You've been listening to Ireland Crimes and Mysteries with Nules. Join us for another episode coming real soon.